Thank you, Vincent-Henri. Thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. And it's a great pleasure for me to be with you in the context of the General Assembly of CAMS. Well, Vincent-Henri, thank you for the kind introductory words. What I can say is that, much of what we do, we are doing effectively because CAMS is also on board. And what I will try to explain to you is how we see some of the cooperation framing in the future, and we see opportunities actually arising in that context. But before I do that, I thought it would be useful to give you a perspective on the context that we're faced with, as Vincent-Henri said, and the context that we're faced with is that of the revision of EU ambient air quality legislation. And this is not something that we do often. The last time that we did that was in 2008. So you can see that this is a bit of a once in a policy cycles event. And it presents a number of opportunities, but the opportunities that we see when it comes to cooperation with CAMS are not limited to ambient air quality. They also extend to emissions, as Vincent-Henri also highlighted, and I will come to that as well once I've depicted the overall framework to you. So what I wanted to do is to, start from the European Green Deal itself. The European Green Deal is the mandate that we received from the College of Commissioners, so from the highest authorities of the Commission, in terms of future orientations on clean air and many other policy remits, including, of course, in the climate arena, with which we also have a very close interface. And when it comes to clean air, the recommendations and the overall orientations from the Green Deal are very clear. The one conclusion that was drawn was that we, as an institution, had to work on the lessons learned from the evaluation of EU ambient air quality legislation, which is a process that we conducted between 2017 and 2019. And in the context of reflections on that evaluation, we were instructed to do two things. The first one, to propose to strengthen provisions on monitoring, modeling, and air quality plans to help local authorities achieve cleaner air. It's very clear that when it comes to CAMS mandate, there is a very strong interface when it comes to the monitoring and modeling instructions that I've just highlighted, and I will explain that in a moment. But we've also been asked to look at proposals to revise the current EU air quality standards to align them more closely with the latest recommendations from the World Health Organization. And those were published in September 2021. So we've since looked at how this would need to be translated into the new EU legislative framework. So this is a very ambitious enterprise that we've been in over the past period, and one that triggers a number of very interesting cooperation opportunities with CAMS. But let me tell you a little bit what the starting point is. The starting point is that EU clean air policy works. As you can see from the left-hand side, the EU urban population that is exposed to air pollution above EU standards from the period 2000 to 2018 has clearly declined. And that holds for all pollutants from ozone to the PM and NO2 concentration levels. And on the right-hand side, you can see that this is translated into EU urban population exposed to air pollutant above EU standards in 2018, 2019, as we could say, rather satisfactory. I mean, if we look at PM 2.5, for instance, only 4% above EU standards, which could be a reason for satisfaction in terms of compliance. But the picture is, of course, quite different if we look at the WHO guidelines as revised in 2021, because the 4% that I was presenting for PM 2.5 now turns into 97%, which is a very, very different picture, and one that is a cause of major concern. And this can be replicated for ozone, 97, PM10, 81, and NO2 at 94. So this is a clear call for more action at EU level. And this is what we've engaged in identifying areas, what we call shortcomings on the left-hand side of this slide, and their related drivers that we need to address. I will not describe them in detail to you. They're very self-explanatory in any case, and my presentation will, of course, be provided to you after the conference. we have a health outcome shortcoming that is linked to the fact that we're not aligned with the latest scientific advice from the WHO. That is self-explanatory, and we need to do something about it. But if we go down the list, and for instance, look at the fourth shortcoming, we also have assessment shortcomings linked to the quality of monitoring and modeling. And this is twofold. On the one hand, while we have 4,000 monitoring stations in the EU that we should be very proud of that have been established in the context of this legislation, the monitoring rules that we have offer some flexibility, which sometimes can be a bit stretched at the expense of the quality of implementation. But more importantly, in a context of cooperation with CAMS, modeling abilities since 2008 have improved significantly. They allow for much more detail, and this is something that we need to upgrade in the new legislation, hence the CAMS interface in that regard. And if we look at the fifth shortcoming on information issues, the public feels rather underinformed about air quality and air pollution in Europe and its impacts. And that is despite all the work that we've done over the past decade. So we clearly need to do more about public information and harmonized communications around public information. And again, I do see there strong potential for cooperation with CAMS in doing so, because this is one of the strengths of what CAMS has developed in support of our policies. But I'll come to some details of that later. Now, if we look at the consequences of the shortcomings that we face, those can be translated into environment and health impacts. Most typically, we refer to the health impacts with over 400,000 premature deaths in Europe that are linked to air pollution. And that is, of course, not considering the morbidity health impacts that are equally significant and need to be attended to. But we also have a number of economic impacts. The costs to society, from 20 billion direct costs to 330 to 940 billion in direct costs. If we look at healthcare costs, lost work days, crop losses, which is extremely significant in Europe. And last but not least, we have a number of social costs that are linked to the inequality of exposure to air pollution and the fact that the most sensitive population groups, be they children, pregnant women, elderly citizens, are more susceptible to pollution. And so we also need to cater for that. Otherwise, it's a cost to our society. It's an inequality driver. And this is what we're trying to respond to through the revision process. And in doing so, one of the most emblematic aspects of the discussion relates to the level of ambition in terms of alignment with the WHO standards. And in that regard, let's take PM 2.5 as the most illustrative benchmark to see what the journey entails. Today in the EU, our annual mean limit value for PM 2.5 is at 25 micrograms per cubic meter. So that is what corresponds to interim target 2 as defined by the WHO. And so if we want to bring this down, and that's what we're assessing in the context of our impact assessment work underpinning the revision, we can consider different levels of ambition from low, which is moving to 15, which is about 8% above the guideline level, a mid-ambition that would be corresponding to the interim target 4 at 10 micrograms, which is 4% above the guideline level, and a high ambition level, which is looking at full alignment with the WHO at 5 micrograms, which is what we're faced with in terms of choices. But those choices cannot be arbitrary. They need to be guided by evidence, and not just health evidence, which is what the WHO provides, but also socioeconomic analysis, as well as geographical and physical analysis in terms of what can be achieved in a given time frame. And that's what we're doing now. And for that, we need to look at the reality that we're starting from. And the reality we're starting from is the reality of the concentration levels that we have in our member states as we speak. And if we look again at PM 2.5, what you can see on this slide in the various member states arrows is the highest measured value under reported data in our legislation and the lowest measured value. And this gives you an idea of the overall trends in the member states in question, seeing that, for instance, on the left-hand side, Estonia is very close to the guideline level. Now, the green arrow at the bottom that I've just highlighted, but that we have a number of other member states that are extremely far from the guideline level, and some that are actually struggling with the interim targets as well. So those realities will need to reflect in how we devise our path, which of course is not going to be governed by the situation today only. It's also and foremost going to be devised by the level of ambition that we need to have to achieve the highest level of protection that we can give to our citizens, but choosing a path that also corresponds to a reality that we can achieve. Otherwise, it's not really a suitable way forward. So that is the journey that we're very, very deeply embarked on, and that will be concluding with the revision. So this is the end of the slides that I wanted to show you, but not the end of what I wanted to tell you. What I wanted to tell you is that in relation to the interface with CAMS, what we see is threefold. We see cooperation in the context of air quality, and that is in particular the revision process that I've highlighted to you. And in that setting, let me highlight a few elements which I consider to be essential. The first one is in relation to the fact that air quality modeling and additional indicative measurements will obviously play a key role in the future framework that we'll have. And the results from modeling and indicative measurements will be needed to better support and optimize air quality monitoring. So in that context, further improved satellite observation data as provided via CAMS could provide us with complementary data for all the locations where in situ instrumentation is currently lacking. This would be very valuable on transboundary air pollution, where air pollutants can move long distances, as you all know, and across continents. And that would include aerosols, dust, and precursors to secondary particulate matter and ozone. And those measurements and data we would see as complementary to in situ fixed monitoring and highly valuable complementary contributions, actually. So that's one point under ambient air quality. The second point is that we see CAMS as playing an important role in complementing up-to-date monitoring data to inform, in particular, the European Air Quality Index, which we've developed over the past years and which we've now turned into an app, which we're very pleased with. And the EEA is the body that drove this work, and we're very grateful to them for that. And further investments are made in extrapolating up-to-date air quality data, improving the spatial representativeness of air quality data more generally. And all of that would be very valuable for us to improve the reliability and comparability of data used to inform the wider public about air quality at their location. So this is a work stream that we see also as particularly interesting to include clear health messages that we're looking at jointly with the WHO and the EEA. So we see that as a very interesting stream of work. One other dimension that I would highlight there is that it would be good if there could be any improvements, if you could actually let us know whether there could be improvements to the forecast used for the air quality index, because this is something that we would like to be able to capitalize upon. And the other dimension, is I've mentioned the ad, is that it would be very valuable for the CAMS community to use it, because the more expert users we see, the more valuable the advice we'll get on how we can improve the tool and make it even more useful in future. One other dimension that I would like now to turn to, if we move away from air quality itself and going into emissions in particular, is that it would be very useful to analyze more the interplay between the EPRTR data on industrial emissions that many of you will be familiar with, and the resulting emission plumes or emission episodes, so that we can identify industrial emission sites that may not be subject to associated in situ air quality monitoring. So for us, this would improve the reliability of spatial emission inventories, which would be progress compared to where we are today. And turning specifically to our main instrument on emissions management, which is the so-called NEC directive, the Emission Reduction Commitment Directive, we would like to see use of CAMS weather data and expertise to contribute to the preparation of a methodology and its implementation to assess the eligibility of possible future member states' applications for a number of flexibilities that we have under that legislation in case of cold winter or dry summer, or on the possibility to depart under certain conditions from air pollutant emission obligations. So that would be a very concrete support to the implementation of that legislation and to the credibility of the implementation process and to its reliability. And for the longer term, we would also see value in a contribution to check the credibility of member states' air pollutant emission inventories through atmosphere observation data, which is something that we could perhaps consider in future as well. And lastly, this is a more specific point, but one on which we know there is a gap, and there has been a demand for a number of stakeholders, which is highly justified, is that it would be very useful for CAMS to help us identify unauthorized biomass burning, which, as you know, is a problem that we need to document and address better. So what I wanted to do in a nutshell here, and I know that time is scarce, is to give you a short overview of areas of further development that we need, and I've already identified, some of which actually we've discussed already very constructively with Vincent Henry and the teams in CAMS, and we're very grateful for that. But you'll have understood that we see the relationship with CAMS as crucial for the future. We see it as developing further in the future. We're very impressed by what CAMS has achieved in terms of tools availability in support of what we do here on clean air in the Commission. We're very pleased with the cooperation that we've jointly created with the European Environment Agency, the JRC, and CAMS in order to maximize the synergies that we can have on the challenges that we face ahead. And of course, an example of our cooperation synergies under the so-called fair mode network of air quality modelers is, I think, a case in point we can build upon to expand to the other areas that I've mentioned now, where we can, through the tools at hand, better support, but also better harmonize the use of models in the EU and actually tap fully into what modeling allows us to do, as well as go into the full valuation of satellite observation as CAMS provides. So I'll leave it at this because I know that I've already gone over time, but the message is congratulations for the work achieved so far. We have many needs that we want to work on with you in future, and the General Assembly for us is a body that we would like to, of course, regularly interface with, because we see, of course, your valuable feedback as also very relevant to try to understand how we can even optimize the relationship. Thank you very much.